Welcome to this video where I'm going to be talking about my classics collection, but specifically the world literature within my classics collection. I thought about making a video that was talking about my entire classics collection, but I thought that might be boring, even though I enjoy watching those videos and I know people like those videos, but I don't know. I'm just more critical, I guess, of myself and videos that I may make. I thought it would be more interesting to specifically talk about my world literature within my classics collection, because classics, world literature, both things that I'm passionate about. I didn't count every single one, but I started counting them, and there are over 50 books within my world literature category of my classics, which, if you're not sure exactly what I mean when I say that, I'm just talking about basically classics from anywhere that isn't the US or the UK or Canada. I like to make an effort to read from around the world. Here's my stick. This shelf right here is my, I guess, world literature classics shelf. The shelf above has all of my British and American classics and one Canadian classic. And then over here I also have my poetry, which does have some classics in it as well. And then I have my unread books separate from my read books, so these are all books that I have read, with like a few exceptions for things. So this is the main area. So basically, starting from over here, like this whole section are European classics, and then I have my Latin American classics, African classics, and Asian classics. I would very much like to expand on basically everywhere except Europe. I want to read more European classics. I want to read more classics from everywhere, but since these sections are smaller currently, my Latin American, African, and Asian classics section, I would like to expand and read more from those regions. So any recommendations I would appreciate. I would also like to say that I'm not going to go into depth or necessarily talk about all of these books. I am going to show you all of them, but I may talk a little bit about ones that I enjoyed, or maybe I'll say ones I didn't enjoy, but I'll talk a little bit about them. And because I'm not going through my entire classics collection, I feel like I have more room to kind of talk a little bit more about them, because if it was my entire classics collection, that would be probably a bit longer of a video. But yeah, for Spain we have Don Quixote by Miguel Cervantes, which is one of the longest books that I have on my shelves and that I have read, but I really enjoyed this book. It surprised me. I was expecting, I guess, mostly just a humorous book, which is what I had mostly heard about this. I had heard people saying, oh, it's a very funny book, but it was also emotional. It had a lot of different characteristics to it, and this was translated by J.M. Cohen. For Belgium, we have Cheese by Willem Elschot, and this was translated by Sander Berg. For France, I have a few books, the first one being The Stranger by Albert Camus, which was translated by Matthew Ward. I also have The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexander Dumas, which is another one of the longest books that I've read and is on my shelves. I actually just read this quite recently, and I think I read it in under 3 weeks. So it's a very readable book. I know it's very long and intimidating, but compared to other books of this length, I read this way faster. So if you're a little bit scared of this book, don't be. And I have the Robin Buss translation, which I heard is a good one. I haven't read any of the other ones, so can't talk on those. And then lastly for France, I have Nature Stories by Jules Renard. Not sure if that's how you pronounce it. Pronounce it. I can't. This is translated by Douglas Parme. Again, not sure if I'm saying that right. Sorry. For Italy, I have The Baron in the Trees by Italo Calvino. Translated by Archibald Cohen. I'm not sure. For Greece, I have The Symposium by Plato. This was translated by Walter Hamilton. For Austria, I have Chess Story and Journey into the Past by Stefan Zweig. Both of these books I gave 5 stars. I really like Zweig's writing, obviously. They're both really short, but they pack a lot of punch. There's a lot of emotion in his books. This one was translated by Joel Rothenberg, and this one by Anthea Bell. For Norway, I have 3 books, all from the same author. I have 4 major plays, Peer Gynt, and The Works of Ibsen, all by Henrik Ibsen. I will say this collection, I haven't read all of the plays in here. I found it used for $1 and it just looked really nice, so I got it. But my favorites were from this collection of 4 major plays, and I would really recommend Henrik Ibsen as an author / playwright, because I haven't really heard many people, or I don't know if I've really heard anyone talking about his plays, so I think he's a little bit underhyped. So this collection includes The Doll's House, Ghost, Hedda Gabler, I'm not sure, and The Master Builder. My favorite was Hedda Gabler. The translator for these were James McFarlane and Jens Arup. This one was translated by Peter Watts. And then from Finland, I also have 3 books by the same author and one of my favorite authors, which is Tove Jansson. So I have Finn Family Moomintroll, The Summer Book, and The True Deceiver. I also have her Moomin comics, but I keep those with my graphic novels / comics, and I really love those. Of these 3 books, The Summer Book was my favorite. She did write in Swedish, so these are all translated from the Swedish. The Moomin book is translated by Elizabeth Portage. The Summer Book and The True Deceiver are both translated by Thomas Teal. And then we are getting into my Russian classics, which I have, how many? 6. The first one is The Heart of a Dog by Mikhail Bulgakov, translated by Michael Glenny. Then I have Anton Chekhov's Plays. This was translated by Peter Carson. This is one of the books where I haven't read it in its entirety, but I still put it on my read shelf. This one was because I had read 2 of the plays, The Seagull and Uncle Vanya, I think, and I didn't really enjoy them that much. I didn't hate them, but I wasn't vibing with them, and so I decided I didn't want to finish the collection, at least not then, and I felt fine with just putting it on my shelf, not having read all of them. So Sorry, Chekhov. Then I have Yevgeny Onegin by Alexander Pushkin. This one is translated by Stanley Mitchell. And then my last 3 books are all Tolstoy. I have Childhood, Boyhood, Youth. This is translated by Judson Rosengrant. And then I have War and Peace and Anna Karenina, which, if I'm remembering correctly, both are the Maud translations. I know for sure this one is. I'm pretty sure. Why are you guys... Yes, this is also a Maud translation. War and Peace is the longest classic and book in general that I have read at just over 1,300 pages. I was thinking recently about this book and my favorite books in general, and I think I came to the conclusion that War and Peace is my favorite book of all time, which seems pretentious maybe. So now somebody asked me what my favorite book is and I have to tell them War and Peace. But in all seriousness, I think it is my favorite book. I think Tolstoy writes characters so well, and we're following them for such a long time in War and Peace. You really grow to be connected to them and invested in their stories. But we're also diving into so many interesting topics. Obviously, topics of war and peace, but relationships and love, and he gets a little philosophical in there as well. But really just an epic story, and I want more people to read it. I know people are scared and intimidated because it's very long, but it's not hard to read, it's just the length that is scary. So, you know, maybe read it. I don't know. So now we are moving on to my Latin American classics, which I have just read a few books actually that have been added to this section, which is the first section. We have some Brazilian books. The first being Near to the Wild Heart by Clarice Lispector. This is translated by Alison Entrekin. This one I just read recently and I unfortunately wasn't a fan of. I think I have come to the conclusion that the stream of consciousness writing style is just not for me, and I don't think I will be reading any more of her books, unfortunately. Then I have The Double Death of Quincas Waterbury by Jorge Amado. This was translated by Gregory Rabassa. Then my last Brazilian book is The Posthumous Memoirs of Brás Cubas by Machado de Assis. This one is translated by Flora Thompson Devois, maybe. For Argentina, I have Jorge Borges and his The Aleph and Other Stories. This is translated by Andrew Hurley. Okay, for Colombia, translator Gregory Rabassa is back because he translated 100 Years of Solitude by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. And then for Mexico, I have 3 books. The first one is my most recent read, actually, and that is The Hearing Trumpet by Leonora Carrington. This, I think, was originally written in English, yes. So Leonora Carrington is a British Mexican author, and she wrote in English, French, and Spanish. So this one was originally written in English, and I'm kind of deep diving into her and her works right now, because reading this, I did give it 4 stars, so it wasn't like, you know, it didn't quite get 5 stars, but while I was reading it, I was like, I'm getting favorite author energy. And like I said, she's a British Mexican author, so I mean, I guess she could have gone in either section of my bookshelf, but because she spent the last 60 years of her life in Mexico, she gained citizenship, she was a founding member of the women's liberation movement there, she had her children there, she was creating her art there. I just put her with Mexico because it made sense for me. My other two books from Mexico are both by Juan Rulfo. We have Pedro Paramo, with a foreword by Mr. Marquez there. And this is The Plane in Flames, which is a short story collection. I originally read this in a different edition, and I think that one was titled The Burning Flame, so slightly different titles. This one was translated by Ilan Stavans, and this one was translated by Margaret Sayers Hayden. Fun fact, if you don't know, Pedro Paramo was published before 100 Years of Solitude, and it is partially what inspired 100 Years of Solitude. So if you're a fan of that book but you haven't read this one, I would recommend reading it because I actually like this one more than 100 Years of Solitude. I enjoy both, but this is one of my favorites. And for Cuba, we have Explosion in a Cathedral by Alejo Carpentier, translated by Adrian Nathan West. This one, I would like to say, I was under the impression that this was magical realism because, I mean, literally on the back, it says it's a magical realist masterpiece. And on Goodreads, it said this was magical realism. But I read this book this year and I was not getting that. Did I read a different book? If anyone has read this book, were you getting that? There's one part towards the beginning where I can see something that happened is like magical realism-esque, but like the book as a whole, I wouldn't describe as that. I'm like trying to remember. I'm like, did I read the book? They're gaslighting me, actually. I think they're gaslighting me on this one. Yeah, that's all. I had to say that because. So next I have my African classics. I only have 3, so give me some recs, I guess, if you have any. The first one I have is Things Fall Apart by Chinua Achebe. This was written in English originally. I do also have Africa's Tarnished Name by Chinua Achebe. It's like the little modern classics editions. I do think that book would be a really good introduction into African literature. If you haven't read any at all, I think that's a good book to start with because it's so short and it is nonfiction, so it's like essays and speeches, and I think it could give you a different perspective possibly on Africa if you don't know much about the continent. So then we have The Palm Wine Drinker by Amos Tutuola. This is also a Nigerian book, also written in English, but I think from what I remember it is deemed like the first book to be written in Pidgin English, so that's interesting. For Sudan, I have Season of Migration to the North by Tayeb Saleh. This was translated from the Arabic by Dennis Johnson Davies. Starting with my Asian classics from Lebanon, we have The Prophet by Khalil Gibran. This, I think, was also originally written in English. And then for India/Bangladesh, we have Sultana's Dream and Padmarag by Rokeya Hussain. She was born in India, but current day where she was born, I think, is in Bangladesh. She is a Bengali author. This contains 2 different stories, Sultana's Dream being a very short, like I think it was about 15, was it even? It was very short. It was a short story and it was like utopian, whereas Padmarag was what took up most of the book. Both of them are feminist works of literature and I think very interesting to read from a historical aspect, but also the feminist perspective from India at that time period. and this was translated by Barnita Bonchi. And then the last books that I have on this shelf are all Japanese classics. I just looked at the back and I forgot, but I got this from the Strand, so thanks for reminding me. That sticker, I guess. But that is The Woman in the Dunes by Kobo Abe. Okay, there's also a bookmark in here. This book has so many things going on with it that I was not expecting. It's translated by E. Dale Saunders. And then I have Kappa by Ryunosuke Akutagawa. This is a short little satirical novel that features these mythical creatures, Kappa, and I quite enjoyed this one when I read it. This was translated by Allison Markin Powell and Lisa Hoffman Kuroda. Then I have Life for Sale by Yukio Mishima. This was translated by Stephen Dodd. And then lastly, for this section, I have I Am a Cat by Soseki Natsume, which was translated by Aiko Ito and Graham Wilson. So now we are at my poetry section, which does have some world literature classics in there, so I'll pull those out. From Chile, we have Pablo Neruda's 20 Love Poems and a Song of Despair. This was translated by W.S. Merwin. Then I have Portraits Without Frames by Lev Ozerov, who was born in Kiev, but at the time when he was born, it was Russia, but I guess could also be considered Ukrainian. This was translated by Maria Blasten. I'm sorry, I don't know that one. Robert Chandler, Boris Draliuk, and Irina Mashinsky. For Portugal, I have More Souls Than One by Fernando Pessoa. This is one of the only poetry collections that I have given 5 stars. For Austria, I have Letters to a Young Poet by Rilke, and this was translated by M.D. Herder Norton. For Greece, I have 2 different Sappho collections. This one is If Not Winter, Fragments of Sappho. This was translated by Anne Carson, and then this collection was translated by Mary Barnard. And then I do also have this modern poetry from Africa, but at this point I don't think it's really modern anymore. First published in 1963, so I'm gonna count this. This contains poets from various, many different African countries. And then finally I have various different haiku books. I have The Essential Haiku, which was edited by Robert Haas, edited and translated by him, and this is all classic haiku poets. Same with this collection, just Silent Flowers, a new collection of Japanese haiku poems, Hallmark editions. It just says edited by Dorothy Price. Japanese death poems written by Zen monks and haiku poets on the verge of death. This was compiled by Yoel Hoffman, but this is another poetry book that I gave 5 stars and one of my favorite books. And then I have On Love and Barley, Haiku of Basho by Basho. This was translated by Lucian Strike. And now I am over by my unread books, and I do have a few unread books that are part of this collection. So I have The Collected Stories of Stefan Zweig, which was translated by Anthea Bell. I have The 3 Theban Plays by Sophocles for Greece, which is translated by Robert Fagles. I have 2 Japanese books. I have Kokoro by Natsume Soseki, translated by Edwin why'd they pick this font? Oh my goodness. Edwin McClellan, and The Boxman by Kobo Abe. Let me just put the translators on the front. Translated by E. Dale Sodders. And I have One Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich by Alexander Solzhenitsyn. Was translated by Ralph Parker. And then I have, for Germany, All Quiet on the Western Front by Erich Maria Remarque, which was translated, it doesn't say, I don't think. And then I'm currently reading The Complete Stories of Leonora Carrington, which has translations from the French by Catherine Talbot and translations from the Spanish by Anthony Kerrigan. Those are all my books that I have from my Classics World Literature collection. Hopefully you got some recommendations maybe. If you have any recommendations for me, I would love to know, obviously. So let me know. Thanks for watching. Maybe see you later.